All right, Dana, thank you for being here today. Can you let us know what your name and your title is?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dana Redden. I'm the owner of Solar Concierge and the founder of the Solar Stewards program.
So excited to be hearing about your pathway today. We're going to start off with a little bit of an icebreaker. So let's say you're stranded on a deserted island and you had a solar PV system there. Somehow you brought that along with you, and it was like 1 kilowatt, not a huge system. But are 3 electronic items that you would bring along with you that you could power with it?
Great question. Never leave home without my 1 kilowatt system. So I would certainly have a satellite phone, my sat phone going, a bug zapper, get those mosquitoes, the sand fleas, and last item, perhaps a radio, with some of my old jams on there. Obviously not streaming, but
I'm just
yeah.
imagining like your Castaway version, like instead of Wilson, you have your bug zap, and you're just
That's right, and some good tunes, because I can hold out for at least 2 weeks with my tunes. Thank you.
Well, thank you for humoring that. Let's just jump straight into what led you to solar. Will you walk through your solar career pathway with an emphasis on transition points, but like really what even just got you started? What led you to solar?
Absolutely. I love telling the story because it's more fun in retrospect, I think, looking back at how things make sense now. But I really think it started gelling in my mind growing up from Western Pennsylvania. So some people have heard some, tales about my corner of the country and the world, but, definitely a huge part of the Industrial Revolution. And some of those remnants, some of those brownfield sites, and the ramifications of the coal industry certainly were part of my upbringing. Acid mine drainage, mountaintop removal, slag piles, just the mesothelioma, people's grandfathers who worked in the mines dying. I was just surrounded by it. And I didn't know much other than that as far as energy, but I think that's where I started to think there's got to be another way. And to skip, quite a few years, I had graduated from my undergrad and went to California just because, I was free and happy and younger. And that's where the solar industry hit me. It was just a moment where I saw those heat lines off of cars in a big parking lot, and I thought, why don't we put solar on that, and power this whole multifamily building over here? And that's when I started going down the rabbit hole of, this makes so much sense. Why isn't it everywhere already? And that just led me to a number of opportunities. And, 11 years later, here I am.
What was your first job that you did in solar?
I worked for a contractor who did windows, doors, and solar. This was in the days where they had the California Solar Initiative, or the CSI. Not to be confused with Law and Order, but certainly very popular, almost as popular probably. And just meeting people in their homes and talking to them about the solar technology, what it could mean for them, looking people in the eye, sitting at their kitchen table. It was really just that sales position. But this particular contractor taught me the 101 of sales, which I didn't even know, but also, how to size a system, what the rebates look like, some of the electrical, getting down and dirty into that from a residential standpoint. My background, as far as school is concerned, is in interior design. So I had already been sizing lighting loads and, looking at the building envelope. And this was when LEED, the first couple versions of that came out. So I had a teaser interest in that, but the industry itself wasn't as sustainable. Certainly has made some strides in that direction, but that's part of the reason I decided that. And LEED decided to take a new path and do solar.
I think that that's not an obvious kind of overlap of design to solar, but I've never heard that. That makes so much sense of doing those lighting loads. That's awesome. So did
Yeah.
you stay with that company and get promoted within that company, or when you were trying to move up, what did you decide to do?
Yes, great question. Because that experience helped me to come up with the unique, at the time, business model of my business, Solar Concierge, which has an interesting name, just because this was still a very for-profit position, this starting solar position, and they wanted me to sell these systems no matter what. If it didn't make sense for that particular customer, meaning, they didn't have the credit, or they, wanted me to finance them at some, no exaggeration, 25% interest. Yeah, they just wanted them sold. And I just thought, I love this technology so much, I can't have people being taken advantage of. It's going to sour it for the whole industry. It's going to create another Cylindra type of thing. Actually, this is free Cylindra. So it's going to create, what we saw happen with Cylindra, where a few bad actors, reflect poorly on the whole industry. So, that I didn't stay with that company long for that reason. And then when I moved to the Southeast, I saw an opportunity for more education in the buying process in a, even more emerging market.
And so you own a business now.
Yes.
And what is your business?
Solar Concierge. So we do consulting work. And then when I realized that sometimes it's not just enough to, look at how a system could operate on a school or a municipality. Sometimes you got to bring the capital to actually get the project done. We created the Solar Stewards program in 2016.
And what's that?
So that is solar development, pretty simply, distributed generation solar development using a third-party model. So, your sun run kind of model, where an investor will basically front all those capital costs, install costs, and then own those solar assets for the length of the system, typically a long-term, 20 years, and sell that clean solar power to that, let's say, municipality for less than they would have been paying the actual grid. So there's a savings, associated with that. But Solar Stewards also brings in some of the other value attributes of solar, which, sometimes aren't as appreciated, such as workforce development, partnering with the, great actors like Grid Alternatives out here, helping people to get involved in the industry. In addition, when we look at a school or any type of educational application, whether it's a university, college, K through 12, where we can incorporate STEM programs,
Okay.
Using it as a learning tool. And then, kind of our claim to fame is marketing the renewable energy credits in a special way. Because what we've seen, and it's been great, the corporate investment in carbon reduction, buying renewable energy credits from the market. But a lot of times these credits don't directly touch, let's call them regular people, people using community centers, senior centers, and working in markets where there's not a huge rebates and incentives. You need a little extra project revenue to make it happen. So it was just connecting those dots and saying, hey, corporates, you can connect directly to a community by, sourcing what you're already buying from these communities. And they wouldn't have had, an economical project without this revenue. So that is Solar Stewards in a whole, a lot of moving parts. But, if I try to describe it in a short way, too late, right? That's Solar Stewards, yes.
So you went from really working, it sounds like, with residential solar, where it was people that were going solar for their own houses, right?
Yes.
And then you went into these kind of larger scale systems where it was more commercial and for businesses and community centers. Can you say briefly what's the biggest difference between working on residential solar and working in this more commercial land of solar?
Right. Well, they're very closely tied, grid tied. um, but there are some real differences, and although the commercial projects that we work on still are very personal to the people. For instance, the senior center, this is where people live. 300 people live there. But homeowners, it's a different case as far as from a business standpoint. Just the sales cycle, the size of the job. Obviously, there are different install methods. The roofing type, slopes. You can do a ballasted flat roof on a commercial project. So, from a business standpoint, you need scale to really make money most of the time. So larger projects, in theory, sometimes net more of a profit. So it helps when you're spending a lot of time developing a project to have a larger number on that end. But at the same time, every watt of solar, every kilowatt of power that solar produces, is beneficial, whether it's a small roof or on a community center.
Thank you. And was it exciting for you to go from that residential to the larger scale commercial?
Yeah.
Or is it kind of like bittersweet in a lot of ways too?
Honestly, I love this sector that we're in just because these projects are a challenge. They're a challenge for for seniors that are vested in the industry, have 3 more decades on top of mine. Just all of the how these developments are structured, limited partnerships. You need sign off from 3 parties, and they're metered in a different way. So you're trying to understand the actual load information that someone has sent you. And anyway, I guess I don't shy away from a challenge there, but certainly the people aspect is still very resonant. So I kind of got the best of both worlds in that. But I do have solar on my own home, my own single family home. I almost bought the house because it had the most perfect southern exposure. All of my solar installer friends helped me nerd out on that. They're like, oh, that roof is so good. I was like, I know.
This is the best house you can get for the solar roof.
That's right. It's this very small system. It's very small. It's 2.2 kW, so it's tiny. But that said, whenever I have the opportunity to talk to someone about a residential application, I have the perfect installer that I refer.
So for folks who are getting into solar now and they're trying to navigate, like, okay, I have this entry-level position. Great. I'm so excited I have this job in this renewable energy, clean energy world. That's great. Sometimes people are thinking, what's next? How do I get the next promotion? How do I move up throughout this industry? Do you have tips for how people can move up or get promoted within the solar industry?
Absolutely. It's such a cool industry because it touches so many different aspects. So, depending on if someone has work experience that they want to kind of leverage into solar, or whether they're starting off kind of with a blank slate, there's just so many opportunities. For instance, a friend of mine that does taxes and is involved in he's a CPA, said, oh, I want to get into solar. I want to become an installer. I want to, get up there and install these things on roofs. And I said, well, there's a big tax component to solar with, investment tax credit and, production tax credit for, other renewable applications. We were just speaking about sustainability broadly, but, every aspect touches solar in some way, whether you want to do power, clearly that's an application. Tax, finance is so huge. How to finance these large projects is, you really, there's quite the specialty. Legal, from the real estate part to, getting down into just contractual law, business law, that's huge. Obviously the construction portion, from how you can procure the panels, where you supply chain, that's really huge. It's just hard to not bump into solar and aspect of solar. So to try to answer your question, pull it all together, I would say, just take your time and look around to see what segment of this huge sector you'd really have the most fun in participating in. Obviously the advocacy is huge. Policy, I never considered myself to be any type of political advocate, but I mean, if you love clean energy, you kind of have to take on that role in a certain part. Leave it to the experts and the lobbyists, they're registered to do that. But, there's just so many opportunities. So, if you feel like you're more of a people person, there's that. If you want to crunch numbers, there's that. If you want to get in the sunshine and make sure these projects are installed correctly, I mean, there's that. It's a diverse industry, and there's something for everybody.
So I was actually watching a webinar with you in it that was somehow 5 years ago already. And you were in a webinar that was on the intersectionality of gender and race. And you actually talk about solar being a career for the future. And can you say what you meant by that, what you mean by that? And is there a same opinion about that now? Is there a different opinion about that now?
Absolutely. Well, first off, thank you for tuning into that. And maybe in 5 years, I'll come back and we'll watch this one and do another one,
Sounds great.
Sure. Solar is not going anywhere. It's a global, answer to a lot of societal problems, whether that is, alleviating poverty, bringing people into an economy. Lots of entrepreneurs in developing countries are able to transact on their phone because they're charging it with solar. Refugees in camps are able to communicate, because they're charging their phones with solar. It intersects with so many things. So granted, there's an amazing market in the US, but, there's no limit there for solar. So that's part of what I mean by the future, but also particularly now, this is April 2020, we're seeing people that need to be connected to the internet. So whether it's a cellular network or a, Wi-Fi network, it needs electricity. So, there is an intersection here in the States for, how are these homes getting this power? And that demand is only increasing. We're only going to get more connected. So that's part of it. And also, relatively solar is new. So the entrenched networks, and there's been a real push to make sure that this new industry reflects our society more so than some other very incumbent industries. But that is also what I mean by solar being of the future. It's really an opportunity to get involved in somewhat of a ground level to an industry that has exponential growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked a bit about solar being like a lot of entrepreneurs in it. And you're an entrepreneur yourself, and you just sat on a panel and you were talking about what it's like to have the experience as a Black woman in the clean energy space. Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I've never really hesitated from being the first one to do anything. So that has served me well as far as that's concerned. But, it does come with the same challenges as probably any, person of color or woman, minority, who does not look like everybody else in the room. Maybe that's one of the similarities I can point to. Along with that comes access to capital. It comes with what they call bias, was it subconscious bias by people, to outright people feeling like they don't need to be as professional as maybe they do other colleagues in the industry, which is unfortunate. But at the same time, that's a great qualifier, because, you really want to just find those people that are doing great work, that treat everybody with respect. And so if they're going to, cancel themselves out on that level earlier, whether or not, that's a reflection on any of their bias or not, it helps to weed out the bad actors, I guess you could say. As far as an advantage, it's been really fun to do things like this, to showcase that, this is an industry for everybody. And certainly it's cathartic for me to even talk about, some of the things that, myself and peers at Look and entrepreneurs like me have had to persist through, so that, others can have some resources to find their way as well. Because certainly we want everyone joining in this industry.
Yeah. Well put.
Thank you.
So I was going to ask about mentorship regardless, and then I was going through the recent Solar Foundation comments on 90% of people say that mentorship was incredibly helpful to them, and only 30% of solar organizations actually offer standard mentorship programs. Can you talk about mentorship as it relates to somebody that's navigating a solar career path, and how somebody might be able to seek out a mentor if there's not an official program that is there?
Absolutely, yes. I think it's so true. And first, I want to give kudos and never stop giving props to Solar Foundation for that amazing DEI study. That was just the white paper resource that I think we all needed to add some validity. It's just, these aren't anecdotes I'm talking about. These are stats, these are figures. And so that was wonderful work. Kudos to them. I know that wasn't easy, and it continues to make my life easier. And how often can anyone say that directly about a report? So that's been great. The opportunity to solar to touch so many lives is really where I think the mentorship comes about. I mean, everyone needs that one-on-one learning experience. I think that's where you can certainly get a certification and learn in class, but the ins and outs of this business, or any real business, are learned directly from someone who's had that experience. And sometimes it's not going to make sense until you're in that position, and then you realize, oh, that's why they did that. So there's a certain level of trust that you need to bring about. And I've had some wonderful mentors. And again, when I refer to all the different aspects of solar, whether it's legal or finance, construction, you really need a mentor that specializes in all of them. You really need somebody that's able to show you those ins and outs. But I would say for any up-and-comer that's looking for a mentor, networking, I mean, that sounds pretty generic, but that's so important. Just showing up to events, making your presence felt, not being too shy to talk about, particularly, I don't think that, Gen Z, let's say, or even these late male millennials have any problem being too shy in a room. I don't know, that's a stereotype. But that said, certainly being respectful and just saying, hey, I'm here, and making very clear this is what I'd want, if there's an opportunity. Technology is great for this. I really don't remember how anyone did anything without LinkedIn. Shout out to them. Not endorsed not endorsed by LinkedIn by any means, but you can find all types of professionals on there. And, one great way to strike up a conversation is just, something notable that someone has done, and saying, hey, that's great. I really appreciated that. Or, boy, that must have been challenging. Maybe you can tell me something about that. There's the old adage, ask for advice and get money, ask for money, get advice. 100%. So you'll up there ask for some money, and, you get some good advice. So just kidding. Yes.
So when people are out there, maybe they're networking, maybe they're on LinkedIn, it almost feels like you're kind of like out there trying to make friends, or asking for a job, or all of these intimidating things where you don't totally know the rules. Is there a point where you actually ask somebody, hey, will you be my mentor?
Absolutely. I would say so. It's great to set expectations. Without them, you know, you can't hold anybody accountable for not meeting them. So, and they could, you know, I think it's pretty, folks that are really in sales or any type of, you know, people intensive exchange are used to really appreciating a hard no, because then you can just move on. So if
Mhm.
you're not asking that question, you know, you're not going to get a yes or a no. You just don't know. You can't be afraid of rejection in any form or fashion in any type of business arrangement. So, you know, if that's a fear, if that's, you know, holding anyone back, I'd say, you know, understandable, but, you know, move on from that. And so, you know, if you just make it clear, and a lot of folks, you know, let me just speak for myself, it's not just I'm doing somebody a favor by being a mentor. It's really helps me to, you know, even think through some ideas or the value that a fresh mind can add to projects and problems. I mean, it shouldn't be discounted. So it's a mutual exchange, I like to think. And some of my mentors, you know, even with this new remote living, working living, they're saying, hey, Dana, you know, help me with the Zoom. You know, so there is an exchange. It's a bimodal exchange, for a solar term there. And it's certainly valuable. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask, because people, I think, step up when they're asked.
And when they're asking, I think sometimes I hear mentorship. Oh, I want to have a mentor, or I want to be a mentor. I think that's kind of a blanket statement where sometimes that can just mean, hey, they're my boss, they're my mentor, or hey, there's this person in my company, they're my mentor because I go to them for questions. Can you say anything about what is kind of the format of mentorship, or what can that format be? Is it that you call them up once a month? Is it that, you know, they just hang around them and they watch what they're doing? What does it mean to have a mentor?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, when you have a mentor that's an actual boss that you're reporting to, certainly that has its own dynamic, because, you know, typically you have a reporting, you know, you have a boss that's going to give you an evaluation every 6 months. So I would say that that's certainly a role a mentor can play, but it certainly doesn't have to be somebody who is in charge of how much, you know, you're going to get on your paycheck. So don't be afraid to reach out to, you know, and again, other segments, you know, so you can kind of cross learn, pollinate, you know, understand all of the different facets of this industry. But it can be fluid. There, I would say that there doesn't need to be any rigid framework. Whatever works. Certainly, with some of my mentors, it's, you know, so they're inundated, you know, under work, and they don't come out for 6 weeks. But when they do, you know, we pick up, and, you know, I save the questions that I had, and, you know, we grab a gin and tonic and, you know, go over them. So it can be as fluid as you want. I would just say that, you know, from a professional level, make sure that you follow up, make sure you say thank you. I mean, basically, you know, some of these basics sometimes get lost. But, you know, make sure that when it's a mentor-mentee relationship, from a mentee standpoint, that, you know, you realize that you're the one who needs to make the overtures, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, whatever they're doing is on top of all that other stuff. And so it's the mentee's job to make sure that that's as seamless as possible.
Yeah, and that's such a good point, because I think people can fall into, well, hey, they're supposed to be mentoring me. Shouldn't they be setting up this? And I don't want to impose on their time, but really you're making somebody's life so much easier if you say, hey, I have a question. Can we meet up XYZ and talk it out?
That's right.
Such a good point to actually let people know it's actually easier on someone if you're the one that is.
Exactly. Yes.
Can you talk about, have you noticed either for yourself or for others, if there are any barriers in the solar industry, and if you have any tips for how to navigate what those barriers in the industry are?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think there's barriers in every industry. And I think, you know, we talked about the Solar Foundation. and their wonderful diversity study. I think that that really lays out what it looks like right now. And that said, you know, all of that comes with its challenges, whether you're a woman in a boardroom and, you know, you're having trouble even articulating a point, you know, getting cut off, or someone says the same thing you just said 3 minutes later, and everyone's like, wow, that's so great. You know, those challenges, you know, they are very real. And I think women and minorities everywhere are really just coming together to figure out ways to overcome those. And, you know, I think just to harken back to, you know, the previous executive administration with the US, there were women in a boardroom, and they would just repeat each other until, you know, until the concept or whatever point they were trying to articulate was made. And that was needed because they were, you know, they weren't being heard otherwise. So teamwork, I suppose, that certainly helps. Yeah, I mean, the challenges are real. There are now new funds for, I mentioned access to capital as a barrier for a lot of enterprises run by women and people of color, but now there are, you know, more incentives, you know, to get above 2%, you know, maybe we'll hit 10, maybe we'll hit 10% of VC capital going to these entities, you know, in this new decade, hopefully more, obviously. But yeah, they're very real problems. And I would say, you know, back to, you know, to bring in the mentorship, they're all unique. They're the same problems, but, you know, there's no clear one-shot solution for every situation. So having a mentor that can say, you know, one, whether to engage and even challenge it, you know, sometimes you just got to battle. Two, you know, what it would look like to rectify a situation that was discriminatory or just plain unfair or not professional. So having someone that's gone through that, but also I think, you know, different generations handle these type of problems different. I can remember, you know, when I was in grade school, I thought, oh, wow, civil rights, you know, they fought for our civil rights. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that's done. And we can just like live lives. And no, it's always going to be a battle. And certainly the generations and people before me that, you know, made this even possible for me sitting here right now, they handled things in a different way. I mean, you know, lunch counters where people are getting abused, and they, you know, with such courage and fortitude, just completely ignored it. I don't know how, you know, that's certainly a tactic that was very successful then. Now, you know, it's a different tactic. Maybe it's, you know, holding people accountable in a different way. All that to say, certainly, I don't think that anyone should feel like they're alone in that and dealing with these types of, but it should only make the, you know, fortitude of an individual that really wants to do anything, whether it's solar or any industry, particularly as a pioneer, you know, just try to, like a Jackie Robinson thing, you know, put it in there and use that for, you know, more success. And that's easier said than done. You know, you get high blood pressure and, you know, aneurysms and things, you know, but certainly don't think that you're alone in that. And don't think that you need to just deal with it. Sometimes you can call people out on the carpet and say, we're not doing that this way. You know, it's not professional. And sometimes listen, and sometimes you just find other people that do. And those people, you know, those are the people you need to find anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Being able to use your voice is so important and so powerful.
Yes, absolutely. And I might add, you know, I think it was in sometime 2019, a good article came out about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that sponsorship being more of a hands-on role. And, you know, you could kind of extrapolate what that might mean. Maybe it's a reference, maybe it's, you know, bringing someone to an event that, you know, you had to buy a very expensive table to be at, something like that. But, you know, when you encounter, and I can say this personally, when you encounter those types of discriminatory situations, it's really great to have some backup that, you know, you can call, and then they can call their boss and say, that's just, so, I mean, that seems very old school, and maybe that's just the way people work. But it also, you know, having the channels to hold people accountable is certainly important. And that said, you know, that kind of falls under mentorship, sponsorship as well.
I'll make sure to link to that article. I don't know if it's the same article that I read, but I kind of blew my mind. I was like, oh, what is this sponsorship thing? It's like talking about how there are people that can have your back when they're talking behind closed doors. It's the people that'll help hype you up behind those closed doors and take you that next step.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I'll see what I can find, and if you find that article, send it my way, and I'll link it in here. Is there anything else that you want to add from your wealth of knowledge and expertise for folks that are looking to get into this wonderful industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because there is one thing I always like to circle back, and I have to remind myself of this as well. One, not everybody has all the answers. So, you know, the certainly in any profession need to have a real fine-tuned detail, and clearly, you know what you're doing. But the nature of every project really lends itself to critical thinking, being able to think on your feet, use, you know, be creative in ways to solve problems, problem solving. I guess, you know, circling back to the beginning of this interview, that's what design is. Design thinking is, okay, here's a problem. Here's a column in the middle of the room. How do we make this space functional? You know, there are no incentives. How can we bring revenue into this project to make it pencil out? So it's problem solving.
Yeah.
And an extension of that, because no one has every answer, please don't get intimidated when, you know, you're starting out in this, because if you realize, you know, big equalizer, clearly there are professionals that you can learn from, and there are standards, and they're done for a certain way, or done by a certain way to a certain standard. But clearly, you know, anybody starting out shouldn't expect to be that expert in day one. Give yourself a, you know, pat on the back for doing things right. Celebrate the small victories, because, you know, a lot of these projects do take, you know, whether it's 4 weeks or 52 weeks, you know, these projects sometimes take a long time. So you have to celebrate those little victories. And in between, you're going to have problems that need to be solved. Never despair. There's always some type of resource out there. So you got to have a little bit of resilience, but certainly just remember that, you know, everybody started somewhere, and this industry needs people that are resilient and problem solvers.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That critical thinking can't be underrated. It is so important, and that is what employers consistently are asking for, people that are thinking about, you know, how can we be resilient through this? I think resiliency is a huge topic right now. So it's a great piece of advice. Little tidbits along the way too within that. So thank you.